South Carolina. This is Palmetto Politics, episode 21. I'm Shannon Grady, and this is,
John Cummings, good morning.
yeah, John and I were this information that's come out about the inmate who was released early. So, John, go ahead and share with the viewers what you found out or what you heard yesterday.
Yeah, my understanding is you probably know that the person in question who was convicted of murder was let out through a deal with a judge that was concocted between Mr. Rutherford, the attorney, who's also a member of the legislature, and an outgoing judge. And the deal was that they were going to let this gentleman out after 19 years because he was cooperating uh, by informing on several things that were going on in the jail, including, I believe, the escape of a dangerous prisoner. Now, that sort of thing goes on all the time. Happens in every state that there are people who become informants and then they go a little easier on them and perhaps they get an early release. But apparently, from what we saw yesterday, Mr. Rutherford, his attorney, didn't follow the procedures. And that's why the Attorney General, Alan Wilson, appeared and demanded that this person be sent back to jail. And Mr. Rutherford's contention was that, well, this is a death sentence for him. He's been labeled as an informant. That's why it was a sealed document, because they didn't want his identity to get out. And sending him back to jail was basically a death sentence. Well, look, if the state legislature has passed laws and the governor has signed laws that spell out exactly the process, what the process is to have this happen, and it happens quite more frequently than people think, and it happens in every state where people make deals, but there's a process. And apparently, Mr. Rutherford did not go through the process. And the fact that his client has to go back to jail, in my opinion, is really on him and not on anybody else. If you wanted to get this gentleman out and you felt that he had given relevant information, in his case, I believe it was to stop someone who was attempting a jailbreak out, who was a dangerous prisoner, et cetera, and he had given information on that. Okay, we get that. And the reason that that is not sealed is because eventually the public finds out about why this person came out. And then you kind of have an understanding, okay, this guy had 25 to life and they let him out after 19 because he prohibited something from happening that could have been of great danger to the general public. So if you
Right.
didn't go, if you
And
didn't jump through, if you didn't go through the process, well, guess what? And that's the attorney's fault. In my opinion, it's nobody else's fault.
yeah, I agree with you on that, John. And then again, I'm not sure that warrants early. I'm not sure that thwarting
Yeah.
a potential escape grants you a 16-year get out of jail
Right.
pass. Maybe it
Agreed.
shaves 5 years off your term and you're going to get out in 10 or 11. But we will never know because there was no negotiation process. Because again, behind closed doors as a secret deal, and it still looks very, very, very conspiratorial that he waited until the judge was one day away from retirement to broker this deal. That just comes across as nefarious. Period.
Right.
It
And
does.
yeah, the surreptitious nature of the whole thing is what sends up the red flags. I mean, that's what brings everybody's attention right to it. Like I said, this sort
Yeah.
of thing does go on, and there's another. I know as part of that process, when you actually do it the way you're supposed to do it,
Yeah.
the victims are notified or their families, and the parole board is notified. Then there's a whole process, and apparently it was not followed, and that's why this person is going to have to go back to jail, and that's why we have rules about such things.
Yeah, they're called laws, and they're laws for a reason. Well, ironically, yesterday I was in Columbia to sit in on a subcommittee discussion of a couple of bills that we wanted to get. Some bills we wanted to get through to the full committee, and some bills we wanted to never see the light of day. But in the course of being up there, I did run into Representative Todd Rutherford. Rutherford, and what I'm say is this: if you are a criminal, you probably want to call that guy because apparently he can make backroom deals. If you're out there committing crimes,
Except this
yeah,
time they figured it out, and that's
yeah,
like I said, in my opinion, he's the one responsible for putting this
right,
gentleman
yeah,
in a bad spot. If you're
yeah,
going to go through the process, and then, like I said, it happens all the time. Victims are notified, and the
yep,
parole board is notified, and very often a lot of the
yep,
people don't agree with what the parole board does. but that's another
Right.
matter. If you don't follow the
Right.
process, you end up right back at where you were before, and in his case, probably even a worse circumstance than he was.
Well, and your point was very valid, as well, that it's not like they have to send him back to the exact same prison.
Right.
They could send him to a location, where
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
little
Word
more
gets out,
relaxed.
but yeah, word gets out. But he's in that spot because of what
Yeah.
Mr. Rutherford and that judge, the outgoing judge, did, and they had to know that,
Right.
and they had to know
Right.
it would be found out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, I agree with you. You can't, um, and to be released early. So yeah, that was a very interesting, detail, if you will, to finding that out. And I'm sure that, our legislator, Mr. Relaford, thought, well, hey, I'm doing a good thing. This guy, prevented something more dangerous from getting. I've been able to expedite his release, and but at the end of the day, like you said, he's the one to blame for potentially, putting his client in an even more dangerous situation.
Yeah, and again, it also points to the fact that there is a major problem with the legislature picking the
Yeah.
judges because Mr. Rutherford is a
Yes.
legislator and he's a criminal attorney, and
Yeah.
the legislature is responsible for putting those judges on the bench. And then you're going to go try a case in front of somebody or make a deal behind closed doors with someone who you were perhaps partly responsible for him to get his job. So that, I mean, that just reeks of impropriety.
Now, let me ask you a question. In the U.S. Congress, okay, there's a couple of reasons why it's important to be the party that has the majority rule. When the House was flipped back to Republican, do you remember all the wailing and gnashing of teeth that transpired, from the Democrats over various committee positions?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
what happens is, for those that aren't familiar with it, when you take back the numbers in the House, when you're in the majority party, you then get to chair all of the committees. And you also have a majority in all the committees that's proportionally similar, it's got to be close, to the
right,
makeup of the House of Representatives overall.
right. And that is the cost of doing business, if you will. When, your party is elected by the people in majority, then that is what is expected to happen. Would you not happen in the South Carolina legislature? And we
Nothing
have a
surprises me. Yeah.
supermajority.
Nothing surprises me
So
in the South Carolina legislature.
I tell you, so it shocked me. So we're up there in Columbia, and, I'm listening to the subcommittee, and the chairwoman, whose name is, representing. By the way, this subcommittee only has an hour. You have from 9 a.m. and they have to a hard deadline at 10 a.m. And they had on the docket 6 bills that needed to be, brought before this committee, and then they would hear the bill. They would hear anybody that half or against the bill, and then of course vote to either push it forward to the full committee or to deny it being, moved out of that subcommittee. Now, irony of ironies, the bill that I was there to help support was 3461, which was the bill in which it's the shared parenting bill, which says that willing, able, and fit, that they should have approximately equal time with the children. This, of course, is in the event of divorce. Um, because for a long, long time, there has been a mindset that if, a man and a woman get divorced, that just by the fact that she automatically would get the lion's share of the time with the children, and the father would be restricted to whatever amount of time she or the judge deems, um, okay. And in some cases, there was a gentleman there who had been allocated 4 days. He could see his kids 4 days. So there has been numerous research done, over 60 metadata studies done that demonstrate that children are harmed when they're not granted equal access to their parents. All that to say this, that bill was placed at the very bottom of the list. Now, again, the meeting's supposed to start at 9 and finish at 10. Well, Miss Bernstein casually strolled in at 9:11. So she was 11 minutes late to this meeting, and it is worth noting that she's a Democrat chairing a committee. And I said, why is a Democrat chairing a committee when the majority in the House legislature. Waiting anxiously to hear that, Mr. Merle Smith. What in God's name is going on in Colombia? That's not how it works. And then it was not lost on me as I looked around the room of those individuals on the subcommittee. Every single one of them was, can you guess their occupation, Joe? John, can you guess?
Yeah, it wasn't working at 7-Eleven, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're attorneys.
Attorneys.
And several of these bills were designed to help the people. And in helping the people, it actually the amount of money that attorneys can make, because one of the big bankrolls that they have is kids in a divorce, because a custody battle can get really ugly and very expensive. And who benefits from those ugly, expensive battles, ladies and gentlemen?
Yep, attorneys.
So we had several bills that were brought forward that would either help or harm the families and the individuals. And not surprisingly, there were multiple attorneys who got up to bloviate about how, oh, this bill is great or this bill is terrible. And of course, their opinion towards whichever way that bill passing or not passing would have benefit or not benefit their pocketbook. Um, so, long story short, we get down to the last few minutes, and it's pretty apparent that there's not going to be enough time on the clock to hear this bill. About a minute left. Bernstein says, out of a sense of respect for her colleagues, she's going to let him at least mention the bill, but he's only got 30 seconds, and there's not enough time to vet this bill, so they can't possibly vote on it. So maybe they'll see it sometime next year. My an additional 5 minutes minimum because she was late showing up and allowed this bill to be properly heard, vetted, and pushed forward, because I don't know what possible reason could you object to a bill which simply states that if a parent is willing, able, and fit, he or she should have approximately equal access to that child. Now, approximately is in itself sort of a attempt to um, work with those individuals that, well, it really should be left up to the judge. Okay, well, the judge can say, well, I think that 35 approximately equal. You and I both could say, well, no, that's not really close to equal, but we'll give him that latitude or give her that latitude. But I don't understand how anybody could be in opposition to a bill that tries to protect children from having one of their parents taken away from them for no reason. Because again, mom or dad's not willing to take care of the child, then it doesn't apply. Mom or dad's not able to take care of the child, then it doesn't apply. Mom or dad is not fit to take care of the child, it doesn't apply. So I am baffled as to why this bill to get before the full committee for a vote to become law. It is absolutely asinine. Folks, if your mom or dad got a divorce, and up until that moment, mom or dad had been your parent and them, on an equal bill, and now suddenly, mom's mad at dad, so she says, "Well, he's a terrible father. I don't want my child to be around him." Well, okay, let's prove that. Let's prove that he may be a terrible husband. You may be a terrible wife, but being a terrible husband or a terrible wife does not automatically to being a so there has to be some evidence to support that the parenting abilities of that individual are not sufficient. And again, that goes to the willing, able, and fit. So, John, I'm a little bit passionate about this because I'm Gallman, and this is sort of kind of his baby, if you will, because he himself went through a painful divorce and had to deal with some custodial issues with his own children. And then, as you recall, we had Mr. Carlton on here not that long ago, and he's struggling with trying to gain access to his children. And then Mr. Jeff, Young, of course, what he said, it had been 2 years since he'd seen his boys, and he was
Yeah.
actually the next day going up to see them. I mean, folks, this should not happen in a society of civilized people. You should not be in a situation where a mom or a dad can make up salacious stories about their partner and their parenting abilities and have a judge say, well, sounds plausible, so let's just take away their rights to see their children.
And
It's astounding to me.
I hate to be so negative, but you hit it right at the top. It's follow the money. There's no other reason, because if you pass a law like this, when it's 50-50, unless there's extenuating circumstances, when you pass that law, it eliminates, for the most part, these protracted battles in court. And the only person that gets fat off of that are attorneys. And that's how you have to look at that. And then if you look at the judges that are in family court, who puts them in family court? Who puts them in their positions? Yeah,
Let
it's
me
the
think for a
legislature. So that's
second.
a whole nother that's a
The
whole
law
nother issue. You
legislators.
know, I've talked about this since we started this show. Colombia is probably the biggest onion of all, because you keep peeling the onion, all you get is more onion. This is layers
Mhm.
and layers and layers of bureaucracy. And in so many cases, in so many areas of governing, it's a stacked deck, and it's going to be very difficult to break through. And every time you try to break through, you end up on a list.
Yes. Yeah, uniform list. Well, and I will say this, there were a couple of our Ori delegation members on the committee. Case Britton was on there and Val Guest. To Case Britton's credit, make a motion to move the bill forward ahead of a couple of other bills so that it could actually be heard and voted on. And the chairperson said, "Well, there has to be unanimous consent," and Representative King was the only dissenting voice, so they were not able to move it forward so that it actually could get a proper hearing and then potentially move the full committee for a vote on the floor and then passes on to the Senate. So I want to thank Representative Case Britton for at least making that attempt. Representative Val Guest didn't do that. So again, I just want to extend a thank you to Case Britton for that in good faith try. Um, but again, I just found the entire process very ambiguous in terms of and I asked the question, I said, well, who determines what order in which these bills are heard in this subcommittee? And the answer I got back was, well, that's so again, Democrat chairperson on a committee in a situation where the Republicans have a supermajority.
Yeah,
Pardon
that's
my French here, but what the hell?
it's to me, it's completely inexplainable, and that's something that, come election time, that has to be made that has to be focused on. It's a major issue. There is no way, especially in any majority, never mind a super majority, in any
Yeah.
majority, the gift is that the controlling party gets all of those positions of leadership. Period. You're not putting anybody who's a Democrat in a leadership position in the House of Representatives when the Republicans, let's face it, in D.C., they have a small majority.
Yeah.
But still, they get all the leadership positions. I don't know what is going on in Colombia when you put Democrats in charge of committees and subcommittees to see what legislation goes forward and what doesn't. That has to stop, and it has to be made a major campaign issue next time around.
I agree with you more. I mean, again, I had no idea that that's how things run there. I would love to be able to make a phone call to Merle Smith and ask him, why, sir, do you still have a Democrat in charge of any committees? And this is the Judiciary Committee, might I add.
Right.
So
It's not like
I
there aren't
understand
Republican
that.
attorneys, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we work our tails off as constituents to get our various Republican representatives into office, and then we don't have the benefit of seeing those Republican legislators chair the most important, then what are we doing? It just is mind-numbingly stupid what's going on in our capital here in South Carolina, as well as the capital of the nation, but definitely the capital of South Carolina. And people are unaware. I didn't know that. I mean, thought, well, I automatically made the assumption, silly me, that
Right.
when you win the majority, you automatically get all of the chairs. You're the chairman of all of the various committees. Well, who knew? That's not how it works up there in Columbia.
Well, and it's just one more reason as to why we, a red state, have a purple legislature. I mean, what's the sense? If you take back the majority and a supermajority at that, you're supposed to control all those positions and move your legislation forward And, majority rule of minority rights, but that doesn't mean that the minority gets to run the show. The majority runs the show, period. That has to
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah, it absolutely has to. I don't understand why. But anyway, that's another issue. I guess that we'll have to continue. We'll keep talking about it. But there is another event coming up May 2nd from 9:30 until 1:30. The group that is supporting the fentanyl bill, which is being put forward to put greater punishment on those individuals who are found to be dealing in fentanyl. Again, a bill that just makes too much sense. And for some reason, Mr. Rutherford, is funny, Representative Rutherford had said, that bill will not pass. And I kind of get it because so that would put his clients in potential danger of a much more serious penalty if they're caught dealing in fentanyl. But I really don't care about his law practice. What I care about is the citizens of South Carolina being protected from a poison thousands of American citizens, particularly within the age range of 15 to 45. So that to me is way more important than his ability to brag to his clients, I'll get you off. So we should be able to support these folks. So on May 2nd from 9:30 to 1:30, way, shape, or form available to go to Columbia just to lend your voice, even if it's only for half an hour or an hour, whatever the time commitment you can make. Run out there, help those folks to get their message across, and make it very, very clear to our state legislature that not passing this bill is not an option. It's got to get through. Right now, as I've understood it, it is still sitting on Luke Rankin's desk. And so please call Luke Rankin and other members of the Senate and say, hey, get this bill through and back to the House, his signature, because it should not take this long to produce a piece of legislation that is designed to protect the young people and the citizens of our nation and our state. Is inexcusable. I don't understand. I understand. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah,
John.
and
Help me understand.
yeah, and again, it's not again, this is not a Republican Democrat issue. It's just like the parenting issue. If you went to the populace and you told them that a father who's a good guy and is willing to parent, if you told him that he was only going to get the ability to see his children 4 days out of 30, I would say 95% of the people in the state would say, no, that's not fair. And if you went to that same group and said, look, we'd like to strengthen the penalties against people who are convicted of selling or importing fentanyl into this state, even so to the point where you can prosecute the dealer for murder if someone dies from the overdose and you can prove the link. Well, 95% of the people would agree with that too. So really what we need to do as a people is we need to get together and shine a light on the people who are holding this type of legislation up, whether it's parenting, whether it's fentanyl, whatever it is. This is not Republican Democrat stuff. It's common sense. And anybody who's against it, they need to be focused on, they need to be spotlighted, and it needs to get out into the media. And of course, I always go back to the fact that the media is so negligent in pointing these types of things out. They do
Yes.
nothing for us when it comes to being the watchdog for we the people. I mean, that's why we have freedom of the press in the First Amendment. That's why it was in the First Amendment. Notice first, it was first that freedom of the press was supposed to be the ability to shine a light on the problems in the government. And we don't have that right now. And look, we need it now more than ever.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And to that end, if you look across the spectrum of types, the newspaper is pretty much dead. It's virtually non-existent. Nobody reads a newspaper anymore. But they should certainly be able to find information digitally. These news magazines should go from paper to digital. And then, of course, that comes with subscriptions and so on and so forth. But the TV, the internet, all of the various means and options out there for media to cover these things is just going uncovered. I hate to say this, but again, you and I and Corey Allen and David Hucks and Paul Gable, few names that I can even think of that in any way, shape, or form attempt to cover anything at the state or local level. Now, you may not agree with all of those individuals, whatever. I'm not here to argue the pros or cons of any of the individuals I just named. I'm just simply saying there ought to be multiple locations throughout the state of South Carolina with individuals like yourself and I covering this information because the voters simply do not know. And we're only doing this 2 hours a week, folks. You can't tell me that you can't find 2 hours out of your week. What's going on in Columbia? What's going on in Horry County? What's the county council up to? What's the city council up to? You got to, if you don't have the time, you better make the time. Folks, this is not going to get better. There's not going to be some magical pill that we all take and tomorrow we wake up and everything's grand. Okay. You need to be an informed voter. You need to get out there and actively participate in the process, which means making phone calls to your legislators, which means, sending letters. Don't bother with emails. I'm telling you, don't waste your time sending emails. They don't get read by the legislators. They get read by their staff, and then they're just phone calls don't go ignored. Letters don't go ignored because they realize if you take the time to write something, put pen to paper, and you put a stamp on it and mail it, you're serious. And then you got to show up. You have to make an appearance whenever possible, like this group is doing again, May 2nd, 9:30 to 1:30. Please show up and help support this fentanyl bill getting passed so that we have more stringent laws on the books for our officers. There's nothing more frustrating, and I know, John, you can speak to this, than being a police officer and you find somebody who's dealing in this substance and you know that they're linked to multiple deaths, and then you get them arrested. Well, it's a simple possession charge, and they let them go. It's
Yeah,
mind-boggling.
and like I said, it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. And this is to get back to the media for a second. One of the things that I really think is missing, because there are still a significant portion of the population that gets their news from the local news channels. Wherever you live in the state, that's where you get your news. And
Right.
many years ago, I'm sure you remember this, there used to be commentary on the news show. People would get up, local citizens, and they would get their 2 or 3 minutes to talk about something that they wanted to talk about. And then if there was a rebuttal, that person could come on a couple of nights later and have a shot at what you talked about. But what it did was it made things visible. It got issues out to the public that normally might not have that light shown on it. You probably remember back in the day with All in the Family when Archie Bunker famously went on about gun rights. That's the type of thing that used to happen on the news every night. You would have a citizen come on for the last 2 or 3 minutes and give a commentary. And then if there was a person who wanted to rebut that, they could do that in a couple of nights later. And it was an important part of the process. Well, the media no longer does that. And there's a reason, because they can't control that. They have no control over what you're going to come out and talk about. So that's something that is really lacking in today's media, especially on the local level, which, let's face it, the media here is pretty much bought and paid for. So you're not going to see what you need to see. You see snippets and that's about it.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that because, I'm gonna tangentially jump on something that's national, but also I think it plays into what you're saying. There was a story that came out that President Biden's press conferences were all staged.
Oh yeah. So
And
yeah.
we kind of knew this. Yeah. There was somebody managed to get a picture of the paper in his hand, and it actually had the photograph of the reporter from, I think, Los Angeles Times. And it actually had the question that she was going telling that bolded the words "you," so the president would know, yeah, she's talking to you, sir, and you need to answer this question, and
It
here's your answer.
that whole thing is beyond the scope of reality. The fact that entire presidency is staged. The fact that he's not going to debate, he's not going to take questions, he doesn't do press conferences. We all know what's going on. It's just that the media, the complicit media, has become the communications wing of the Democrat Party, which is now as
Yes.
radical as it has ever been. There is no big tent in the Democrat Party right now. If you're not a radical, there's no room for you. For example, Bobby Kennedy. That's all you have to see. You see Bobby Kennedy. He's a Kennedy, folks, and they're canceling him because he doesn't
Shut him
he
down.
doesn't march in line with what they want to say. But when you see that whole thing, it's a disgrace, and everybody knows it. The world is laughing at us, and that's why they're taking advantage of us. And that's why you have every problem that you have foreign policy wise is solely on their shoulders. And we're look, we're on the brink of nuclear war. I hate to say it. I mean, that's
Yeah,
where we are, and it's
yeah,
as close as we have been going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's
I
where we
totally
are, and it's all been unraveled
agree.
in 2 years by this cabal that runs the government, because it's not Joe Biden. He's not up to it.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting to me that Trump has now said that he doesn't think he's going to do any debates either. I think that's going to hurt him. I don't think that's why. I think he needs to be on the debate. But I, I'm so frustrated with what's going on across our country and in our state. I just, how the heck did we get here? How did we get to the point where it doesn't matter who you vote for? They're all just as bad. Our state legislators, and without, with very few exceptions, there is a limited difference between our Republican legislators and our Democratic legislators. And it is extraordinarily infuriating. It's really infuriating because we want people that represent our values. We want people that will go to Columbia and hold up what it is we thought they stood for. And yet, time and time again, that doesn't happen. And without fail, there's what was it, 1% of us that actually vote in the primary, 1 to 3% that actually vote in the primaries. Am I of registered voters?
Yeah,
Is
in
that
the
the right number?
primaries, it's really low. Yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty
primary is
low.
really low.
So, and I don't think people appreciate the importance of voting in these primaries because this is where you determine if you're going to have a good candidate or a bad candidate. And folks, I'm going to tell you right now, Luke Rankin is a terror. He is a so-called Republican who actually votes more liberal than named Democrats. And yet this clown will probably get a ton of votes again. And right now he's got $240,000 sitting in his war chest. Election coming up in 24. And without fail, this guy should be out. Out, out, out. He's terrible. He's sitting on this bill for the fentanyl. He is obstructionist in every perform conservative bill that comes forward. He is bad news. He doesn't want to change the judicial form that we have now, whereby lawmakers, legislators get to choose the judges. He doesn't want to change that because, oh, wait, he chairs that committee.
And they're
So,
sitting right. They're sitting on the constitutional carry bill again as well.
yes.
And everybody
Yeah.
knows what the numbers are as far as the populace in this state. People want that, and he's sitting on it again. And you're going to see the power that that seat has. Is they're going to decide whether or not that goes forward. And right now, the way it looks is it's not going to go forward. And people have to remember that come election time, and that's what has to be hammered home. These are things that we, the people, agree on, and in a very large percentage. And yet, our representative body is not representing us.
Well, it's interesting that I know if you've been paying attention to any of the ads that pop up on Association is hammering one of our state senators, but it's not Mr. Luke Rankin, it's Mr. Greg Hembry. And of course, Greg Hembry is not a fan of constitutional carry either. So I don't want to make any kind of statement that he actually supports it. He doesn't. He doesn't support it. But I think they need to spread the wealth around a little bit. I think the NRA needs to go after Greg Hembry and they need to go after Luke Rankin because they're both opposed to the idea of constitutional carry. Now, I think I mentioned this before because I want to be open and transparent about this. Um, I have a serious inner struggle, if you will, over the issue of constitutional carry. On the face grants what doesn't grant it. The Constitution protects our God-given right to carry a weapon, and I feel like full stop. The end of the discussion. That's it. As long as you're not a felon or have some other reason why you shouldn't be allowed to carry a weapon, the Constitution, therefore, you should be able to carry. But then in the back of my mind, I made this statement many times because I've had folks say, well, you know what? I think teachers ought to be allowed to carry. And I remember thinking, there are some teachers I work with, I wouldn't want them to carry a pair of scissors, because they're just not terribly smart. So that's the struggle with me because I feel like, all right, I'm fine with having constitutional carry. I'm fine with not enforcing someone to have to pay money to the government to get a license to carry, if you will. However, I just want to make sure that the individuals that are carrying these weapons out there actually know how to use them safely, know where they weapon, so that we can be certain that there's not going to be somebody showing up to pick up their kid from school with their weapon strapped on their hip.
Right.
Now,
My feelings about that. You're right. There's always a gray area that it's look, it's a dangerous gray area, no doubt. But my thought is, if you pass the constitutional carry, that allows somebody to have an open carry permit, right?
yeah,
So if you want to have a full carry permit, concealed carry permit, then you should be able to do that through the government. You have to take certain classes. If you are former law enforcement, former military, you should pretty much just get that if you go in and prove that you're former law enforcement or former military, because you have a tremendous amount of training, and therefore you can be trusted to have this full carry permit, concealed carry permit, because I think that's important. I think there need to be, and it goes back to the teachers too. I don't think anybody wants teachers in the classroom with a sidearm exposed. I don't think that's the way to go. That's just me. And it's
yeah,
also important. It's also important in the school situation, that the students and everybody else doesn't know exactly who's carrying and who's not. That's the idea. I mean, that's the preventative part of it. And for me, the one thing I was really surprised about down here when I moved down here was all of the signs that say you can't carry a gun here. You know what? In even in New York, that doesn't happen. If you have a
right,
full carry permit in New York, and it's only concealed up there, and it's difficult to get unless you're former law enforcement. If you have a full carry permit, you can carry that firearm anywhere,
yeah,
anywhere except court. When I went to court,
right,
if I had to go to court for something, jury duty or whatever, the courthouse isn't exactly in the greatest neighborhood. So if you
right,
think I was going down there without my gun, and I was carrying a gun since I was 22 when I went on the police department. If you think I'm
right,
going down there without it, that's not happening. But when you got there, you had to tell the court officers, "Look, I'm a licensed firearm holder," and they would vouch for your gun, and you'd get it on the way out.
right,
But the fact that there are all of these places, shopping malls, baseball stadiums, the airport, all of these places where you can have a carry permit and not carry your gun, well, then guess what? That's really not an open carry. Now, my thought is, if you're going to have those places, I understand if you have a shopping mall, you don't want people walking around with sidearms. I know they do that in Texas, but look, this isn't Texas, sorry. But I think that the ability to get a concealed carry permit should be additional. Then you can take the classes. Then if you want to pursue that, that's up to you. Nobody's prohibiting you from your right to bear arms. Nobody. But if you want to take that a little further, well, then I think you should be able to do that with training, with authorized training through the government. I think that kind of fills the slot there where, you do have the right to carry because it's constitutionally protected. But if you want to pursue that to carry it a little further, if you want to have a concealed carry, well, then that's up to you to take the classes. I don't think that's a bad idea.
right. Yeah, because I said, at minimum, I wanted to see, even if you make it free, if you do some online training that they have
Right.
to take, and I discussed this with one of our representatives, and I don't want to throw him under the bus. I won't say his name, but I did discuss the idea. I said, you could do a 1 hour or 2 hour training online and set it up so that every 5 minutes you take a short, 3 question quiz. And that's
Right.
just basically to make sure they're actually watching the video and they don't just put it on and walk away and do other things. So that, at minimum, they understand, oh wow, go courthouse. Wow, okay. Wow, I didn't know I couldn't carry that into a hospital. So those are things that I feel like would make sense. Um, and then people have to take the responsibility to go out and practice, because if you don't practice something, when the time comes that Lord forbid, that you actually need to use it, if you haven't practiced, it may just be a really heavy paperweight that you've been carrying
Right.
around with you. So, but
But I
anyway,
think,
so
yeah,
those
I
are,
think it's
yeah,
important. I really think it's important that there's still that ability for people to carry concealed, because when you don't have that, you're going to have these zones set up and they basically become gun-free zones, and you do
yeah,
not want that. That is the
yeah,
last thing anybody wants, is a gun-free zone, because if you look at mass shootings, that's where
yeah,
they occur every
yeah,
time.
because a gun-free zone is a soft target.
Yeah, always, always
Yeah,
look at the movie theaters, shopping malls. That's usually where these things occur. And that's usually because they know that you can't carry. And guess what? Law-abiding people will abide by that law. If you,
Yes.
most of us are honest, hardworking people who will
Yep.
abide by the law and not carry their firearm into those places. But you should have the ability to seek a concealed permit after you have the open carry through the constitutional carry. And I think that's important, because then you're eliminating safe spaces, those quote unquote safe spaces. We don't want those gun
Right.
free zones. You just don't want them.
Right. So it's definitely going to be an interesting couple of weeks because I think they finish up May 11th. I want to kind of like the last the drop dead moment when anything can get done in this particular half of the
Yeah,
session.
anything or
Now,
nothing, right?
right, right. Now, the way South Carolina works is their session is actually 2 years, it's 2 years basically. So they'll be finishing up the first half of the session in May, and then they'll come back in January half of this. So, um, and then I want to say that there were some bills that were introduced yesterday that got through the subcommittee that are just flat out unconstitutional. And one of those was a bill, and I understand that the meaning behind it was good. It was a bill to deal with ending lease if you are in a CDV situation. So, see, I shouldn't say that. Most people don't. Criminal and domestic violence, folks. So, if you're renting a house with your partner or whatever, and you're in a situation where you're being abused, physically abused, and you want to escape that, they're going to change law to say that as long as you can prove that you're being physically abused, then they'll let you break your lease. Well, the problem with that is it's flat out unconstitutional. Yeah, that's not the way the law works. When you sign a contract, the contract supersedes any of that. So it's not even constitutional, but yet this bill got through the subcommittee. There has to be some other workarounds, but violating the Constitution is not a workaround. Um, and then there was another bill that, of course, attorneys loved because if you know what a guardian ad litem is, that is a person who comes in and typically helps to oversee of children in the situation of a divorce or separation or whatever. And this bill basically said they want to make all the guardian ad litems attorneys. And then what that means is it's going to add an extra financial burden on the husband and wife or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the case, because instead of having a layperson be the guardian ad litem, which is going to be significantly less expensive, now you got to pay for a basic third attorney. And so there was much debate about how this is going to impact someone who's, say, a single mom or a single dad, or someone who has a very modest, the ability to be able to finance that is going to be extremely difficult. But they, of course, shockingly, all the attorneys disagreed. And one of the attorneys who got up and spoke, I think her name was Ashby. She was an attorney, and she spoke and said, not a legislator, she was just speaking on bill. And she, oh well, when I'm in court, and I've had situations where the guardian ad litem would actually take their personal views and cast them onto my client. And so she thought that my client's religious beliefs were weird and strange. And so she put all that in her notes that she thought strange. And she said, and I just said, did you know that Christians believe that a big whale ate a man and he lived inside of him for 3 days? Isn't that weird and strange? And I thought to myself, so let me get this straight. Just because you have a law degree, that means you're not going to take your personal beliefs and put a person, because you just did it. You just did it.
Right.
you know,
So you're no different than anybody else, right?
exactly. You're
Again,
no different.
follow the money.
Yeah.
Follow the money.
Yeah.
And what people don't know about, they always think is strange. I used to tell my students this all the time when we would be teaching religion as the Great Awakening in the United States and everything. Not to make this a history class, but teaching in a Catholic school, most of them were familiar with the Catholic religion, but a lot of them were not. We had, when I left, I think we only had about 58% of the kids were Catholic, and we would bring them to mass, and these kids were like, "What is this?" They're raising something to the sky. They're burning smoke. They're ringing bells, and everybody's like, "What is this?" And guess what? For
Pagans.
half the kids, it was church. For the other half of the kids, they're like, "What is this?" And you could say that about any religion if you're not familiar with it. Anything that you
Yes.
walk into blind, you're going to say, wow, this is weird. How could you believe in any of this stuff? So, just because you're an attorney doesn't mean you're not going to carry those prejudices with you. Of course you're going to. You're always going to look at stuff, and you can't involve that in the case. That's the worst thing that you can do. So again, follow the money, more money, more work for more attorneys. And when you have an heavily attorney laden legislature, that's what you're going to get.
Absolutely. It's just appalling. And I don't know, and I'm being honest, folks. I don't know the exact answer to this, other than Mr. Thomas Beach, Representative Beach, made a impassioned plea yesterday from the state house steps, and they said, what can we do? And he said, folks, you got to run. We have
Yeah,
to get support. We have to get more people that are willing to run for office. And if we can get the Freedom Caucus up to around 30 members or more, that is going to give them significant sway over what happens in the House. Because right now, as you all look, an establishment body has created this oath, this loyalty oath, where you have to raise your right hand and sign your name, saying that you will only support incumbent Republicans. You will not support anyone who would run against them. That flies in the face of what democracy actually even stands for. It flies in the face. And it's just appalling to me that that was even something that was considered, let alone actually done. And then they ousted all of the members of the Freedom Caucus because they would not sign this loyalty pledge. And I think that's why Trump is saying he's not going to debate, because the RNC created a system. They said if you're going to
yep,
participate in the debates, then you have to pledge that if you do not win the primary, that you have to endorse whichever candidate does. And I
right.
think to some degree, I understand Trump saying, I'm not doing that. So that may be why he said, I'm not going to debate. Um, almost say, okay, all right, if that's what the RNC is going to do, then let's have some third party entity host debates. To hell with the RNC. Let's have some independent organization say, okay, we're going to host a debate, and anybody, Republican, independent, whatever, that wants to participate in the debates will host those debates. And hey, let's have it done on the Daily Wire. Or say, or the Daily Show. I say Daily Wire because that's Tucker Carlson's group. And then, of course, the Daily Show, not the Daily Show. What's Ben Shapiro's? What's it called? Is it the Daily Show?
Daily Caller,
Thank you, Daily Caller. Yeah, the Daily Show. I think that's a liberal
Jon Stewart. Yeah, the old
wacko
Jon
that does
Stewart
that
show.
one.
Yeah,
So we could have one of those guys host it, and it would be a one time paid thing. You pay $1.99 to watch the debate, whatever the case may be. Let's do that. I mean, really, to hell with the RNC and this loyalty oath nonsense. We can get around that. Know that they can says, oh well, if you participated in this, then you can't be. Yeah, pound sand. Go pound sand. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
The American people have had enough.
yeah. And the DNC came right out and said they're not having any debates. They're just not going to do it. So, I mean, they can't put Joe Biden in that spot. They just can't.
Yeah,
And if President Trump or anybody else is the nominee, I would imagine that Biden's not going to get involved in those debates either. There is no way that they can put
yeah,
him out. If you watch, just
yeah.
he was running 2.5 years. He was obviously mentally compromised to a point.
Right.
He's far worse now. I mean, far
Far
worse.
worse.
And that disease, God help him, it progresses, pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
they can keep giving him drugs and everything to make him show up for an hour or so, and then
Right.
he's got to put a lid on the day. But I can't
At
imagine
9:03
him
a.m.
get. He doesn't even do press conferences without those notes, and even then, it's pretty limited. I can't imagine him going 90 minutes, especially against Trump, because you know what happens when you get into that into dementia, which is obviously, I think, what he's suffering from. You tend to get angry, and you see that once in a while. And that's why they keep him when he's on television or whatever. He's on for very short periods of time, because
Mhm.
if you confront him, he's going to get angry. And we've seen it a few times. They do a great job making sure that people don't see that. But
Mhm.
90 minutes,
Yeah.
him, not happening. I don't think he could walk for 90 minutes. Never mind
Yeah.
think.
I agree with you. It is embarrassing. Plays into why our nation is in such trouble and such turmoil, because literally none of the international communities respect him at all. They know, they see it. they recognize this guy is half the man that he was in 2008, in
And he wasn't the
2012.
sharpest pencil in the box to begin with.
And
He
he
was never,
exactly
never. He just, I mean, and he's
never.
like the wind. For every stance that he takes now, you can go back in his Senate career and you'll find him saying the
Yeah,
exact opposite. It's
exact opposite.
whatever's beneficial for he and his family. And obviously, there's more to come on that because the money is still flowing.
Yeah. Telling, but in the meantime, we have got to encourage people. And I just, gosh, I mean, folks, if you have the means and you have the time, please consider running. Please, I'm begging you, please consider running for office, because we have the makeup of those folks in Colombia. We got to, absolutely. And if for some reason you cannot run, I mean, go ahead and start putting some pennies in a jar or some coins in a jar, and take that money and get behind a candidate who is going to be opposing whichever incumbent there is. Now, this is an apology that's going to go out to Tracy Beans Diaz, and I don't know that she'll actually ever see this show, but I do want to apologize to her now. Last time, one of my problems or my concerns with her and the leadership team of the ACGOP at that time was that they were advocating for every summit to be primaried. And I said, well, yeah, but what about the folks who are actually doing a good job, and you primary them and they spend half their money fending off a primary challenge and they have less money to fend off a Democrat challenge? Well, eyes wide open now. The fact of the matter is, in Ori, now I can't speak. There certainly are counties, Athens and Anderson, and some other counties have some really good guys, Freedom Caucus men and women, and they're doing a tremendous job. But in Ori, there is no one who is deserving of a free pass in the primaries, meaning that they shouldn't face a challenge. Every single member needs to face a challenge. Now, I'll say this again, and I'll reiterate this: William Bailey and Tim McGinnis are the best of what we have for sure. And in terms of the person who most frequently communicates with their constituents and keeps them up to date on what's going on, known as William Bailey, is the most communicative, and he will talk to his constituents. He's mad at me right now because I've just been calling him out because he's a moderate, but I still love William. I really do. And I feel like if we got a couple of folks in the Ori delegation who were true conservatives, and even especially members of the Freedom Caucus, that's going to bring William to a point where he feels safer in voting more conservative, as well as Tim McGinnis. And I'll even say that for Case Britton. I think those guys would start voting a lot more conservatively. Can't say the same for Heather Emmons Crawford. She's never going to change her vote. Don't know that I really think Hardy's going to change. Absolutely no change. Greg Henry's doubtful to change. Goldfinch is doubtful to change. And those are your senators, by the way, your state senators. I don't see them making a change. So it is imperative that we get people out there to run, and don't think, wow, well, I can't beat a Greg Henry. I can't beat a Steve Franken because they've got time and money and whatever else. Believe you me, I am not the only person that's recognized how these guys are voting. And so if we can get somebody out there that's willing to primary them, that's to step into that arena. Now understand, you're going to get, I mean, they're going to come up with stuff. They may even make things up about you. Willing to get out there and do it. John and I have both stepped into the ring, and we've dealt with the negative. And I'm sure if we run again, that it's not like the next time is going to be better. Oh, they'll be nicer to us next time, John.
Oh
No,
yeah, oh yeah.
but we need folks to be willing to get into the process, because better people to Columbia, then nothing's going to change. It's just not
Yeah, and
going to change.
it also really points to the fact of something that we talk about all the time here is that you need to get rid of the open primaries because of the gentlemen, the people that you just mentioned, Tim McGinnis, et cetera, William Bailey. Those are guys who probably, they're in the 60s when it comes to conservative ratings, right? In the 60% or so.
Yep.
You'd have to think that because Ori is more conservative than that, if
Yep.
there were not open primaries and the primaries were closed, that those gentlemen, just by the nature of that change, would have a higher conservative voting record because they wouldn't have to worry about the primary per se.
And the
You wouldn't
Democrats
have to
crossing over.
attract,
Yeah.
right? You wouldn't have to attract those Democrats crossing over because guess what? If you're a real conservative, you don't have to worry about that if it's just Republicans.
Right.
It's so that's another reason why that you're going to get more representative government if you get rid of the open primaries, because they don't have to worry about the votes.
Yep.
They're going to vote what the people want, rather than you're trying to play this politically and saying, geez, I don't want to alienate, that 20% of Democrats that comes over and helps me win the primary. You don't have to worry
Yes.
about them. So
Yep.
it's a key.
And that's absolutely spot on. And I would even say that what typically happens is not only do you get the crossover during the primaries, but you're also going to get Democrats who will vote for you in the general because they recognize, well, he's not a Democrat, but he at least votes with our group, 40% of the time. So let's pick him because I know he's going to actually be more likely to support. And I'm not throwing my vote away because in this position is just. But again, you close that primary, that's going to change the math calculations significantly. And I think it will add to our representatives being more conservative in their votes because, as you said, they won't have to pander to that 20% of the Democratic Party that comes out and votes in the Republican primary. So you be made aware of what's going on. There are still a few bad bills out there that are being pushed through. So pay attention to that. We need to do all that we can to let our voices be heard. Call the governor if there's something that's about to be signed that we don't like. And unfortunately, he's already signed this. Um, I'd like to see that being repealed. I also discussed yesterday the whole tax that is going to the Myrtle Beach Chamber of Commerce, and that's how they end up getting this, $52 million that they're getting. I would like either scrap that or B, change it so that there is a required audit. Because honestly, right now that's just a slush fund that there's all kind of LLCs that popped up, and so we know that there's money going into those various LLCs, and not for nothing, but the District 61 representative, the president of the Myrtle Beach Chamber of Commerce. So uh, she probably has had her fingers in some of that cash flow as well, and at least been able to direct it in ways that would help her in her campaign process. But um, I don't like the idea of going to a private entity that we cannot then say, okay, let's see your books. Let's see where this money is actually going. Because the purpose of that money was supposed to be to send out, advertisement to the various states and get people to come down to Myrtle Beach. But what's really happening is folks are coming to Myrtle Beach, the city of Myrtle Beach. They're going to North Myrtle. They're going to Garden City, Surfside Beach, because those beaches have better reputations. Myrtle Beach itself got a terrible, they call it what, Murder Beach, Dirty Myrtle. So some of that money should probably be allocated for actually revitalizing
Yeah.
Myrtle Beach and getting rid of some of the blighted areas.
Yeah, and for all of the money that they're supposed to spend on attracting people to come to Myrtle Beach, then you have an article like popped up in the paper the other day that the hotels in Myrtle Beach were voted among the most dirty in the country. So no matter how much money you spend when to try to overcome that, when that's the
Hmm.
view and you combine that with the rising crime rate, that's what you really
Yep.
have to focus on, not these little pet projects and building housing for, foreign students to come in and work for
Yep.
the summer and things like that. That's not what you should be focusing on. What you should be focusing on is not changing just the view of the place. You have to change the place. You
Right.
have to change it.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I know. There was a time, I think it was like 2 summers ago or before COVID, when that, like, bed bugs are a big thing down here in Myrtle Beach, and, that was "Don't go to Myrtle Beach, get bed bugs." So, I don't know how, and I think even last summer, or the first summer that was a full summer of everybody's open, they only had 65% capacity, the hotels and things, or 60%. That's terrible. That's terrible, guys. It has to be at 80% or better to really be demonstrating that it's profitable. So I even hit that marker at the end of COVID when everybody's like, "I'm free," and they're running around trying to have their vacation is very telling. And so we better see some significant changes. And that's Mayor Bethune. You got to get out there and do something, ma'am, if you want to see folks actually coming to Myrtle Beach, because otherwise, because people are not going to come. That they'll go to North Myrtle, they'll go to, as I said, Surfside Garden City, but they're not coming to Myrtle Beach itself. So. Well, that's all I've got. Anything else you want to add before we wrap
Yeah,
up today, John?
yeah, real quick, just a note to Nikki Haley. We don't want, at least I don't want Disney in South Carolina. She basically came out and said that the
No.
state of South Carolina would love to have Disney in their 70,000 jobs. That was a big statement that she made yesterday. So if Governor DeSantis wants to go out and alienate Disney, we'd be happy to have them. Well, I don't know who you made you spokesperson for the state, but I would think that if you took the pulse of the people here in this state, they would say no to that.
Yeah, no, thank you. We'll pass. We'll pass. I'd love to have 70,000 jobs, but not with a corporation that's basically filled with pedophilia and other nonsense. We will pass on that. Um, all right, folks, that's all we've got for you today. Please like and share this post so that folks can start learning about what it is that's going on in the state of South Carolina. And we will try to keep you abreast of any new information as it comes out. We'll see you next week on Tuesday. God bless, Godspeed, and as always, see you next time.